Good evening. Thank you for joining us, friends and relatives, for Yellowbird Traditional Storytelling. My name is Lynette Tubles, Duwanya Kiapiwi, Scouts Away Woman. I'm coming to you from Lame Deer, Montana, and just want to thank everybody for joining us this evening and continuing to support Yellowbird Traditional Storytelling. We've been doing this now for a year, bringing you stories. As soon as the pandemic started, we decided that we really needed to, focus on those things that are important, and the history, knowledge, language, from our elders and from our traditional storytellers is so crucial. And so, we started the Yellowbird Traditional Storytelling. So we've been going for a year now. I just want to thank all of you for your continued support. We really appreciate it. And tonight we have so much going on right now. We're, with our traditional storytelling as well, some of our future guests and some things that we have, coming up in our future shows. And that's what we're busy working on. So tonight we decided that we're going to do a replay of Chief Oren Lyons and Faithkeeper of the Onondaga. So I'm just going to share a little bit about him. He was one of our guests, I believe, back in May of last year. But what he shared is so crucial and so important. I feel that we need to share it again. So tonight is a replay, but I hope that you stay with us and listen all the way through. And I love the way Oren speaks and shares, story. So it's like a circle, just like in the circle of life. So everything comes back full circle. So I encourage you to listen all the way through. And I'm just going to share a little bit of information about Oren. Oren Lyons is a member of the Onondaga and Seneca Nations of the Iroquois Confederacy. As an activist for indigenous and environmental justice, Oren works with communities across the globe. As a faith keeper, he upholds the history and traditions of the Turtle Clan of the Onondaga. Oren often addresses modern-day conflicts by sharing traditional views on the laws of nature. When he says you can't negotiate with a beetle, he implies that nature will respond to climate change whether or not humans do. And so I think, Oren has traveled all throughout the world, sharing this message and sharing this knowledge and about our connection to the earth and our responsibilities to the earth. And tonight he's going to talk about that. So I encourage everybody to listen. But this is a quote from Oren that I found, really powerful. The law says, if you poison the water, you'll die. The law says that if you poison the air, you will suffer. The law says if you degrade where you live, you'll suffer. If you don't learn that, you can only suffer. There's no discussion with this law. And, that's so true. And these times right now where we live in southeastern Montana, I think a lot of the country in the Midwest is experiencing this, but what they call a polar vortex. And tomorrow, I believe the temperature is supposed to be minus 20. It's supposed to get down to minus 20. And it's been about anywhere between minus 11 to minus 15 right now here at night. So it's pretty cold. And they call that a polar vortex, I guess. So he's going to talk about, climate change in his own way through his stories, his history, his knowledge. So I encourage all of you to listen. I also encourage you to share, with your friends and relatives. And we're looking forward to next week's show. So I encourage you to be back, and that will be live. So thank you, everybody, and enjoy the story from Chief Oren Lyons. And we've I just want to add that we've known Oren for quite some time now, and we have the utmost respect for him. So enjoy the program tonight. Thank you, and we'll see you back next week.
Thank you for the invitation to be here on Yellowbird. I'm pleased that you've taken the time to produce this kind of an event for our communication to our people. I come from a period of time when our communication is by runner and carrying messages in your head. And I've seen a lot of changes in my lifetime. And my early life at Onondaga was in the early 30s, or 1930. That was during the so-called Depression. And for the Onondagas here in the Northeast, our territory is right in the upper central part of New York State. We have a territory that's always been ours, has never belonged to anybody else. So it's tax-free. It's also free from any other interference. So we don't have any federal presence here. State presence is still our people, basically. And I should report that so far with this pandemic that we're all involved in and enduring, our village has been spared any problems so far, but we're surrounded and it's not over by far. We have to really prepare ourselves for long-term problems, one after the other. We've passed the time of living, what we call living and enjoying life, to now we're in a time of survival. And that's very abrupt, as you just felt. In early January, everybody was talking about what the next season was going to bring and so forth. And then suddenly we were, in one day, flipped by this pandemic that we're enduring right now. And it's changed our lives drastically, and particularly our brothers, our brothers from across the sea, our brothers and sisters. The cities are suffering. And as you know, a lot of our people are in these cities. And they're enduring the same thing. It's not going to go away soon. So we should prepare ourselves to do a lot more planting than we were doing. I know here in upstate, our village, we got used to heading down to the grocery store rather than tilling the ground. Now those grocery stores are going to have empty shelves. So all of our nations that have land should be getting back to planting. I think by the fall, we may be in a very strong, serious food crisis. So it's early now, time to plant. But as you said, as I was talking earlier, The weather has been a problem. And before we get into any storytelling, I'm just going to be kind of giving you a survey of what I see over here, because we're in the far northeast, upper central New York, very old village. Hard to say, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years old. And we're still here. And the reason why we made the village here, or our leaders, people back then, had good water. Good water. And I think in the coming times, we're going to get back to that fundamental issue of good water. It is an issue already for many areas of this country and around the world, actually. Water is life, as we all know, and good water is a blessing. And we should be thankful every morning. Every morning, you should be thankful for this water of life. So we have up here, upstate, Great Lakes. Probably within the Great Lakes and the surrounding territories where our Six Nation villages are, has been for a long time. There's a lot of water, good water. But with the ice melting in Greenland and melting around all the world and all the mountains, the Andes, the Himalayas, all of those great ranges of mountains, ice is melting, snow is going. And in Greenland in particular, water is gushing into the ocean, changing a lot of things. And we're in this very serious time of change. Kind of going back to when our brothers first came across the water and impacted us negatively. We've gone through pandemics before. Isn't it the first one? The first pandemic was, of course, the loss of all of our people from the diseases that our brother brought across. It was a huge one. It went way across, raced across the land because our people did not have a defense against it. So today's virus, this virus we're experiencing now, is precisely what our people faced the first time, because you don't have a defense against it. So you're experiencing, and I'm now talking about our brothers and sisters from across the water, you're experiencing what we went through initially. You're dealing with something that you've never seen before. So there was a great extension of our people during that early time. Lately I've been reading a lot about the suffering of Black people and people of color. And they're speaking up now, and the history is being talked about. And some months back, in a magazine called Newsweek, they talked about the first crime, the initial crime against nature, against us, which was the slavery. And I was going to correct them because that wasn't the first crime. The first crime in this country was the terrible loss of our people by these pandemics that they brought with them. And we suffered a great deal of loss. Even before they moved inland, the viruses were lethal to us. Simple things like wouldn't bother you today, common cold, kill people. So we lost a lot of people. That was the first pandemic. And then we've suffered the same pandemics after. Today, as we have to really assess our ability to survive again another pandemic, it reminds me of a lot of our history down through the ages. When I was a young man, I was, brought up on this Onondaga nation, small territory, which was once very vast, and but it was secure. And our system of governance was the old system of chiefs and clan mothers, and the old systems that governed all of our people across North, Central, and South America, we called Great Turtle Island. And when the reference of Turtle Island, that goes back to the creation stories of the Haudenosaunee. When the earth was covered with water, and when our first life coming from the other side of the stars down to the earth, but no earth, all water. When the turtle offered his back for this woman bearing life, who were now held in suspension by the wings of these great swans. And so the earth, the turtle said, well, I'll offer my back. But it didn't have any earth on it. And so animals said, we have to find earth. And Beaver tried, and he couldn't make it. He died in his attempt, several. And finally this one good swimmer said, I'm going down. And he went on down. It was a muskrat. And the muskrat got all the way down. He did get some earth in his paws and his mouth, and he came back up. But he died just before he got to the surface, but he did get to the surface. And so they took that pad of land that he brought up from his mouth and from his paws, and they put it on the turtle's back, and that was the land that allowed this woman bearing twins in her womb to land, beginning the earth. So the creation story of Haudenosaunee begins way on the other side of the stars, and it's a long story there before she comes down. There's a whole long story about that. Even a lacrosse game. But we have a short time, so I won't get into all of that, but I just kind of laying a background of where we are for us. And that story, the development of where land came from, and then we have three major stories. That was the first one, the one of creation. And then the second story is coming of the peacemaker. And that was the development of the confederation that we now call the Haudenosaunee. And the French called us Iroquois. And the English called us Five Nations. And then in 1712 and onward, nation from the south came north back into our territory, and that was Tuscaroras. They became the Six Nation. So when you read the history that is written by our brothers from across the sea, you will see that around 1722, the previously called Five Nations by the English became the Six Nations. And that's what we're known as today, the Six Nations. So that would include the easternmost nation, which was the Mohawks. And they were the elder brother. Next to them was the Oneida Nation, and they were the younger brother. And in the center, where we still are today, is the Onondaga Nation, and they were an elder brother. And then directly to the west of us was the Cayuga Nation, and they were a younger brother. And then further west, and called the Western Door, were the Seneca Nation, and they were an elder brother. So we had a system of elder brothers and younger brothers, and that's how they conducted, and that's how we still conduct our discussion today. I think that we are probably, and this is a guess because I don't know everything, but the surveys, I think we are the last traditional government maintaining the systems that we originally had. We're the last traditional government in North, Central, and South America still in charge of land. We don't have an elective system here. We don't have a Bureau of Indian Affairs, Department of Indian Affairs. We are who we are. And we're still here where the great tree of peace was planted on what is now called Onondaga Lake. And that took place. There, different times. We're not certain. It's still a discussion. But going by the original story and talking about how the peacemaker was gathering these five warring nations in a fierce fight. It seems as though during that time that we had lost all of our instructions and we're just involved in constant warfare. Terrible time. I was thinking as I observed the activities in Eastern Europe, and I watched how those nations fought each other. I said, it must have been very much like that during that time in our history, when we had forgotten and put aside the original instructions of peace. And this was the time when the peacemaker came amongst us. Came from the northeast side of what you call now Lake Ontario. And he landed in the northeast side of Lake Ontario. It's where Mohawk Nation was. And they were the first encounter. It's a long story. And he convinced the leaders of his mission and moved west rather, to the United Nations, taking with him these leaders from the Mohawks. And they convinced the Oneidas that they put down their arms. They went to Onondaga, but the fierce leader there, Tadodaho, this evil beyond description, lived in a swamp. And they said, around where he lived, even bones of people were there. And so they had to go around. And they went to the Cayuga Nation. And they convinced them of this mission. And then finally to the west was the Senecas. And they were difficult because they were having an internal battle among other battles. But they were convinced. And then it was at this time that how to convince them to join the Confederation, he predicted tomorrow that the sun would be covered. And the following day, the sun was covered. There was an eclipse. And that convinced the Senecas that this person was somebody they should listen to. And so they joined the Confederacy. And then he went back. And collectively, they approached or tried to approach Tadodaho, or the Onondagas, because the Onondagas were right in the central of this confederation he was building, peace. And it was a fearful time, and they couldn't pull him out. They weren't strong enough. He had powers as well. He could bring thunder and rain. He could do a lot of evil. Early on, in the first part of the story, when Peacemaker landed in the Northeast, and there were two Mohawk men that saw this canoe coming. It was a white canoe. And it was early morning, and they were watching this glint they saw out there, far, far out, this vast lake. And then they saw that this was a person, single person, paddling this white canoe. And so they were painted. They had been on a mission, death and destruction. And so they knocked their bows, their arrows. And they watched this canoe come into shore. And it was a very curious canoe made of white stone. And a very imposing figure. And he announced himself. They asked him, "Who are you?" "I have a mission." "What is the mission?" "Peace." And they say, not much of that around these days. And they were wondering whether they should just simply dispatch this person right there, but he is imposing. And he does have this presence. So while they're deciding whether they're going to dispatch him or not, he speaks, "Take me to your leader. I want to talk to them." "About what?" "Peace." So they decide, well, okay, maybe we'll give him another day. They said to him, "Over yonder there's a lodge over there. It's run by a woman by the name of Jagonsasa. She's from the Erie Nation. And she hosts men on a path that can stop at her her lodge and be fed and rest. Meanwhile, we'll take your message to the leaders and see whether they will invite you. So they left, and he went, and that's when he first met Jagunsa. And she lamented the situation. She said, I'm tired of this warfare. I feed these men. Sometimes they're enemies. They leave their weapons of war outside. They come into my lodge, they can rest, and I feed them. She says, but it's terrible. Sometimes enemies sleeping side by side here. But my lodge peace. So he tells her of his mission. And she says, wonderful mission. I want to help you. And so the story goes. So eventually they come back and they are now held at bay by this powerful Tadodaho at Onondaga. They have now with them 4 nations of leaders standing united by this idea of peace. But they can't penetrate, they can't bring him out. He's laughing in there, you could hear him laughing at them, bringing rain on them, winds on them. So the peacemaker says to his companion, which is another part of the story, his companion, Lyons, who is Onondaga, and whose daughters had been killed by this evil sorcerer. And Lyons had lamented and gone out into the forest to grieve. And during all that session of his loss, he himself was bringing himself back into life by remembering the instructions of peace. And so at that time, when the Mohawks were meeting with this peacemaker, they said, you know, there's an Onondaga that lives in the woods out there and he speaks like the way you do. He talks about peace. And so there's a whole story about how the peacemaker and Lyons are united in a common cause of bringing peace. So they were partners. And it was then, now coming back to Onondaga, that they sent for Jagunsa. She might help. So runners went, and she came. And she said to them at that time, well, you know, she said, this song in my head, I keep hearing it, I keep singing it. I don't know where it's coming from, but it's a song about peace. And she said, maybe that will help. And so she taught them the song. So now, singing the song, they approached this great swamp. And the song was pulling this evil, very evil sorcerer out. The city's hair was full of snakes, withering snakes. It was evil, almost inhuman to look at, twisted, powerful. But they said as he was coming forth, snakes were dropping from his hair. And he was transforming as they saw him into more human features. But still, he stood his distance. And they bargained with him he said, why should I? Why should I join you? I have great authority, great power, do what I want. And they said, if you join this mission, Onondaga will be a central fire. Everybody will come here. And your title, Tadodaho, will always be here at Onondaga. And you'll be a leader. You'll be a leader, but a leader in peace. And with that song and with the discussion, he came forward and he joined the Confederacy, the last nation to join. Onondaga became the central fire of the Haudenosaunee. And so it is today that we have had a succession of Tadodahos. And I've lived under 4 of them. I'm an old man now, but when I was a very young man, there was a Tadodaho. And I went to visit him when I was just probably 6 or 7 years old. I remember that very well. Because as I was coming down the road, heading back to my house, I stopped and I said, maybe he can tell me about things I would like to know. So I went into his yard. I went up and I knocked on the door, and his wife, very motherly woman, answered the door, and I was standing there, and I said, I want to see if I can talk to the chief. And she says, oh, well, I don't know. What do you want to talk to him about? She says, I said, well, I want to understand what he's doing more. So she said, come in. She brought me in the house, sat me down, and gave me something to drink and cookies, warm cookies. And here comes Tadodaho, George Thomas. He's a big man. He was a big man. And of course, I was small. And he said, well, what can I do for you? I says, tell me about the nation. Well, they really didn't know what to do with me. So, I had a little meal, and they said, he says, now you should get back to your home now, because it's going to get dark pretty soon, and your mother will probably wondering where you are. And we'll talk about it. It was a nice event. They were very, very nice to me. They were very friendly. And so I left. And he was a succession of the Tadodaho that came out of that swamp. And he was followed by, when he passed on, his son, Ellenson Thomas, was asked to take that position by the Council of Chiefs, because it is the Council of Chiefs that decide who will be Tadodaho. And he accepted that. And he died very young and very fast. And so the next Tadodaho was asked to take his place. And I was there then. At that time, I had accepted to try to help the council. So I was there at the meeting when the council chose that third Tadodaho. That was Chief Lyons, who happened to be my father's brother, my uncle. But he was on the council. He was the sub-chief at the time. But he didn't know that they were going to ask him to be the Tadodaho. They decided, and he accepted. So he was the third Tadodaho. So I served under him for many, many years. And then in 1996, he passed on. And we raised another Tadodaho. And that's Sid Hill. Sidney Hill. From 1996 to today, is the fourth Tadodaho that I have served under. And so the process that I'm talking about was a Haudenosaunee, those chiefs. And the title that I sit under, I'm not a principal chief. I'm what we call a Faithkeeper, a sub-chief. In the other nations, there would be a sub-chief. In the Onondaga nations, Faithkeeper, because we hold the special duties of maintenance and holding the wampums of the Confederation here. So way back, 1965, accepted that work with great trepidation and understanding that I really wasn't qualified. But as the clan mother who is in charge of the title, Tadodaho, when she asked me to take that position, she wanted to be the title. I said, no. I said, I don't manage the language well enough, and I'm not qualified, but I will help. I said, there's better men than I that I think can take that position. So that was Paul Waterman. Paul and I grew up together. He was a little older, but we grew up together, running in the woods and fishing and hunting, playing. I know Paul. He could speak all the languages because his grandmother used to host. People would come for big events at the Onondaga Longhouse, Six Nation events. Everybody would come, and her house, which was just a few, maybe 50 yards from the Longhouse, across the street, a lot of the elders, traditional people from the Cayuga and the Seneca nations would stop there. And so Paul grew up in that atmosphere, and where he heard all the Six Nation languages, and he could speak or understand all of them, but he could speak most of them too. I said, now there was to be a man that could hold that title better than me. But it was hard to convince him because these titles there's no compensation for them. You don't get paid because it's the old system. Over 1,600 years old. And in those days, leaders were in service. That's what you did. You served not only the people, but the world at large, protected everything alive. Any of our leaders can no longer hunt, can no longer kill. It's a very demanding position. And I was really a novice at that time. pretty headstrong and convinced. First of all, convinced by my friend and buddy that I grew up with, Irv Powlis Jr. We grew up running and hunting and fishing in the woods all the time. We were like brothers. And I convinced him to join me. And I said, well, let's go get Paul. And so we went and got Paul. Oh, no, he says, oh, no. No, when we came in the door, he said, oh, no. But we stayed on his case, and our clan mother was very helpful and very glad. So there was three of us, and then there was already a young chief there. He was younger than we were, actually. But he had just got in there. His name was Lazor, William Lazor, Billy. Again, my cousin. And so we had fresh blood came into the chief's council. I was way back, 55, 66 years ago. So I've been in this position a long time, and I've just been, since I was more adept and I had gone through university, so now I had communications abilities, and so I was a runner for the nation. I just go and do the speaking. They would give me the instructions, and I would go. Could be useful in that way. And Paul was the principal chief, and we worked together for many, many years, partners. And when he passed on, my clan mother at that time was second clan mother I served under. She chose as the principal chief my youngest brother, Kingsley, because Kingsley had taken the time to become fluent in the Onondaga language, which I didn't. I wasn't. And that was fine with me. So I just always maintained my position as Faithkeeper, that title, and so it is today. So this is a succession of leaders. It's like that with all of the titles. And the Onondaga Nation has 14 of those 49, 50 titles of the Confederacy. 51 comparing with the title that was bestowed on the Tuscarora Nation coming in 1712. So we're an old system, and we're still the same. And I sat in a council yesterday, and I listened to the discussion, and the speakers all knew, for as far as I was concerned, all young people who were children when I weren't even born when I took that title. And there they were now, sitting council and speaking the language fluently. That's amazing. It's an amazing process. And now they're faced with the responsibility of carrying on our nation in these times. And all of the leaders that I sat with in 1965 are all gone. I'm the last of that generation. I remember when I first started, I used to look at the old men sitting there, and I was wondering what they were thinking. Now I know what they were thinking. It's a succession of tradition. And so the Confederacy still stands. And Onondaga still remains to be a central fire. Things are different. We're scattered. Have 17 territories evenly distributed between what is now called Canada and the US, all the way to Seneca's Cayugas down in Oklahoma. You know, history of taking them over there, Oneidas all the way to Wisconsin, and then Quebec and Ontario. We still have a large group of people under our wings, but there's an elective systems in there as well. So it's a long story, but basically coming back to that great time of the peacemaker, when he planted this great tree of peace here, the shores of Onondaga Lake. He said, as he gathered all of the people there, he said, I plant this great tree of peace. It will have 4 white roots of peace that go in the cardinal directions of the earth. He says, the tree reaches to the sky. And he said, when you're weak, when you're tired, he said, this tree will be your backbone, your spine, keep you strong. The great long leaves of peace. He said, and people can come, follow its roots back to the source and come under the great laws of peace. And that's how it stands. The tree still stands. Clan mothers still choose the leaders and has the power and authority to remove them. We have a responsibility to overlook their conduct. She has authority. So the power is distributed evenly between men and women. And the peacemaker said at the original time, he said, the earth is female. And therefore, the system that I'm promoting here will be following the women's side, matrilineal. So we have a matrilineal system. And I know, talking to a lot of leaders across North America, indigenous nations, often that's the case. The women are foundational. Not all, but very strong. And so this confederation based on peace is now facing, along with your confederation, because there's many confederations across North, Central, and South America of our people. There was a style of thinking, a way of doing, of meeting and conducting councils. Not to say there wasn't warfare, there was always that, but it was always the councils that brought peace. It's a system that this world sorely needs at this time. A system that's based on principles. Number 1 principle, peace. Second system is equity. Fairness to all the people. Equal. And even in the Council of the Confederation, all heads are equal. It's always based on equity and equality. And then third principle of union. To be united. It's great confederation. unity of strength based on peace. And when the peacemaker made this great confederation, he said to the leaders, in your hands I place this great wing feather to brush away anything crawling at its roots, gnawing at the tree. And that wing feather was the men in defense of the tree and the system. And so I know from my travels that all of our nations have these great stories. And they have these great founding systems. They have creation stories, beautiful creation stories. I love those creation stories. I want to hear them all. And as I've heard my elders say, I said, that's a beautiful story, your creation story. It must be true. Now let me tell you mine. So there we are. We're responsible. The number one rule that I see across Indian country is still there, still stands. And that's the rule of respect. Respect for life, respect for yourself, respect for the earth, respect. Great, great rules that we had, protocols. You didn't come walking into a village. You stood at the edge, edge of the woods, and then somebody would come from the village and say, what's your mission? Who are you? And there was always, in every village, there was a lodge for any visitor who would come. And they would come and they would be asked to refresh themselves and to have a meal and to rest. And then tomorrow, speak to us of your mission. That was common straight across the country. And when our people would be walking, maybe by yourself, in the great forest, large animals, they would be singing. They would sing traveling songs. And their voice would be singing loud and clear as they're walking. They would be announcing to all the life around them, I am coming, I'm walking in peace. And those animals would draw to the side, and you would never see them, but they would watch you as you went by. You announced to them, they respected that. So respect, number one. Peace. That's our mission. It's a mission that we carry all the time, and we're not giving it up. And now, above all, peace is the answer to all of this. To share. That was the next share equally. One dish, one spoon. Old, old treaty. So with that, all my brothers and sisters, all my relatives out there, I greet you and I wish you well. Done it.